The Hells Angels biker found the little girl bound near a spillway gate, and his answer roared louder than the flood. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a dark, stormy evening. The wind howled through the trees, and the sound of rushing water could be heard from miles away. As the rain poured down relentlessly, a lone rider was making his way down a narrow road that led to an old spillway gate. The road had become slick, the floodwaters rising rapidly, threatening to engulf everything in their path. But amidst the chaos, the biker's instincts kicked in. He heard something, a faint cry, almost drowned out by the roar of the floodwaters. He stopped, his heart racing, straining to listen. There it was again, a desperate cry for help. Without thinking, he pulled his motorcycle to the side of the road and cut the engine. He scanned the area, barely able to make out shapes through the heavy rain. Then, through the mist, he saw her. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, was bound to a metal pole near the spillway gate. Her body was trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She had clearly been abandoned. Her clothes were torn, and she was soaked to the bone, her hair matted against her face from the pouring rain. Her lips quivered as she looked up at the biker, too scared to speak but clearly pleading for help. The biker's heart clenched. He had seen enough suffering in his life. But this was different. He wasn't about to let this little girl drown in the flood, or worse, be left to die alone. He quickly dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. With practiced hands, he cut through the ropes that bound her, her body flinching with every tug. She winced in pain, but her eyes held a glimmer of hope. The biker knelt down beside her, his leather jacket soaked from the rain. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." She looked at him, still unsure, her fear evident in the way she flinched at every movement. The biker, despite his rough exterior, softened his tone. He gently lifted her in his arms, cradling her against his chest. "I've got you," he reassured her. "We're going to get you out of here." He took one last look at the spillway gate, the floodwaters surging dangerously close. Time was running out. The biker knew he had to act fast. As he started to carry her toward his bike, his mind raced. Who could have left her here? Why was she alone, bound and abandoned in the middle of a flood? But there was no time for questions right now. The biker's only concern was getting this little girl to safety. The rain continued to pour down, the wind howling around them, but the biker kept moving forward. He knew the storm would be relentless, but he also knew he couldn't let this child face it alone. As they reached his bike, he set her down gently, making sure she was safe and secure. He fired up the engine, and they sped off into the night, the sound of the bike roaring louder than the floodwaters behind them. But deep down, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. What had happened to this little girl? And who would come looking for her? The ride back to the biker's garage felt like an eternity. The rain had not let up, and the wind howled through the trees as if nature itself was trying to stop them. The little girl, still shivering from the cold, clung to him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his waist as he navigated the slick road. He glanced down at her, her face buried in his leather jacket, her hair matted from the storm. It was clear she had been through something unimaginable. Who would do this to a child? Who would abandon her like that, with the floodwaters rising and the storm raging on? His mind raced with questions, but he couldn't afford to get lost in them. He had to focus on getting her to safety. His hands gripped the handlebars tightly, the roar of the engine cutting through the rain. The biker's heart was heavy with anger and confusion, but there was also a strange sense of urgency. This girl needed him, and he wasn't about to let her down. As they neared his garage, the biker couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He could finally get her warm and dry. He had to make sure she was okay, that she didn't suffer from the cold any longer. He parked the bike in front of the garage, quickly dismounting and lifting her off the seat. She was still too scared to speak, her wide eyes never leaving his face. He could feel her trembling against him, and it only made his protective instincts kick in harder. The biker opened the garage door, the familiar smell of motor oil and grease filling his senses. He led her inside, the warmth of the space a stark contrast to the freezing cold outside. He gently set her down on the old leather couch that sat near the corner of the room, the leather creaking beneath her weight. "You're safe now," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "You don't have to be scared anymore." He could see the doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty. It was clear she didn't fully trust him yet. Why should she? She had been abandoned by someone she trusted. And now, a stranger was the one who had pulled her from the floodwaters. But the biker wasn't a stranger to kindness. Beneath the rough exterior, the scars, the tattoos, there was still a man who cared. He wasn't going to let this little girl down. As he removed his soaking wet jacket and hung it up, he walked over to the small kitchenette in the corner of the garage. He pulled out a few snacks, something to give her a bit of comfort. He wasn't sure what she had eaten before, but she needed something now. He returned to the couch with a bottle of water and a small bag of crackers. Her eyes followed him, warily, but she didn't say anything. He sat down beside her, careful not to make any sudden moves. "Here," he said softly, offering her the water. "You need to drink something. You're shivering like crazy." She hesitated for a moment, looking at the bottle in his hand, but then slowly reached out and took it. As she drank, the biker watched her closely. She wasn't much older than a child he had lost many years ago. The memory of that little girl, the one he couldn't save, hit him like a punch to the gut. He had tried to protect her, tried to do everything he could, but it hadn't been enough. He couldn't bear to see another innocent child hurt. He didn't know who had done this to her, or why, but he was going to find out. He wouldn't let anyone get away with it. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. But after a few moments, the little girl spoke in a small, trembling voice. "Why did you help me?" Her words were soft, almost a whisper, as if she was afraid of being heard. The biker looked down at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. "Because you needed help," he replied simply, "and no one should ever be left to suffer alone." She looked up at him then, her eyes still filled with fear, but also something else, maybe hope, maybe trust. For a moment, the biker felt something shift inside him. He had always lived by the code of the Hells Angels, a life of toughness and survival. But in that moment, he realized something. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He had someone to protect, someone who needed him. The little girl finished the water and handed the bottle back to him. "Are you going to leave me now?" she asked, her voice small, almost pleading. The biker shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay with you." His words were firm, but gentle. He didn't know what the future held, or what dangers lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let this girl face it alone. He wouldn't let the past repeat itself. As he stood up to check the door, ensuring it was locked, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was warmth. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone in the world. And no matter what, he was going to make sure this little girl never felt alone again. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky that was an eerie shade of gray. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the world outside still looked like it had been torn apart by nature's fury. Inside the garage, however, it was warm and still. The biker glanced over at the little girl, still curled up on the couch. Her small frame was wrapped in one of the old blankets he had found, her face a peaceful contrast to the fear he had seen the night before. She had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from everything she had endured. The biker wasn't sure how long he had been sitting there, just watching her. He had never been good at comforting others, at offering the kind of solace that didn't feel hollow. But there was something about her that made him want to be different. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about his past, about the things he had done, or the life he had led. All he could think about was keeping her safe. His attention snapped back to the present as he heard a faint sound. The girl was stirring, her eyes fluttering open as the sunlight filtered through the grimy windows of the garage. She blinked a few times, disoriented, and then her eyes met his. For a moment, there was silence. Neither of them knew what to say. The little girl was the first to speak. "Are we still safe?" Her voice was small and unsure, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The biker nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Yeah, you're safe. We're good." She seemed to relax a little, but the tension in her shoulders didn't completely disappear. She was still guarded, still uncertain. The biker could understand why. He had been a loner for most of his life. He had never trusted anyone, never allowed himself to depend on others. And yet, here he was, protecting a child he barely knew. It felt strange, but somehow right. As the minutes passed, the little girl sat up and looked around the garage. "This place smells funny," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. The biker chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's got a lot of old tools and grease. It's where I work." She nodded but still looked uncomfortable. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her gaze shifting back to him. He paused for a moment, wondering how much to tell her. He didn't want to overwhelm her with his past, with all the things he had done that led him to this point. But she deserved honesty. "Yeah," he replied. "It's not much, but it's home." The little girl didn't say anything else. She simply nodded, as if she understood. After a few moments of silence, the biker stood up. "I'm gonna make some breakfast. You hungry?" She nodded again, more eagerly this time. The biker made his way over to the small kitchenette, pulling out a few cans of beans and some bread. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could make a decent meal when it mattered. As he prepared the food, the little girl wandered around the garage, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked at the tools, the old motorcycles, and the various knickknacks that filled the shelves. She was trying to distract herself, but he could tell her mind was still racing, still trying to process everything. He set the food down on the table and gestured for her to sit. "Here you go," he said, pulling up a chair for himself. The little girl hesitated for a moment, but then climbed into the seat, her hands trembling as she picked up the spoon. The biker didn't rush her. He understood. It was going to take time. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional clink of their utensils. Finally, the little girl broke the silence. "What's your name?" she asked, looking up at him. The biker paused. He hadn't given his name to anyone in a long time. "Jake," he said finally, his voice low. "Jake Morrison." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm Emma." There was a pause, and then she added, "Thank you, Jake." His heart tightened at her words. He had saved her the night before, but now, sitting across from her, he realized how much she had already changed him. Emma. The name echoed in his mind. It was simple, innocent, but it carried a weight he hadn't expected. He had never thought of himself as someone who could offer safety or protection to anyone. But somehow, with her, he felt like he could. He had to. The moment lingered for a few more seconds before the biker stood up. "I'm going to make a few calls. You stay here and rest, all right?" She nodded, watching him with wide, trusting eyes. He could see the hesitation in her, but there was also a sense of peace starting to settle in. He had no idea what the future held, what kind of danger they were about to face, but one thing was certain. He was going to protect Emma with everything he had. He picked up his phone, dialing the number of an old contact from the club. He needed answers. He needed to know who had done this to her, and why. And he wasn't going to stop until he found out. Jake paced the garage, his boots making soft taps on the concrete floor as his mind raced. He had made the call, but the person he'd reached out to was of little help. There was too little information, too many questions, and no real answers. The sound of Emma's soft footsteps behind him broke his focus. She had gotten up from the couch, her small frame standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. "Jake?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, like she was trying to find the courage to ask something important. He turned toward her, forcing himself to relax, to be the steady presence she needed. "Yeah, kid? What's up?" She fidgeted slightly, her eyes darting between the ground and his face. "Why did they do it? Why did they leave me like that?" The question hit Jake harder than he expected. He had tried to protect her from the reality of her situation, to shield her from the truth. But Emma wasn't a child who could be lied to. She had seen too much, felt too much, and now, she was starting to understand the depth of the situation. Jake sighed, running a hand over his face as he tried to think of how to answer. "I don't know, Emma," he finally said, his voice low. "But I'm going to find out. I promise you, I'm not going to let this slide." She looked up at him, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of doubt and hope. "You'll really help me?" she asked. The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I won't let anyone hurt you again." Emma smiled weakly, but it was a start. She looked at him with a flicker of trust in her eyes, and it made Jake feel like he had a purpose. As he turned back to his phone, the biker knew this wasn't just about revenge or finding answers. It was about protecting this little girl, about righting a wrong he couldn't ignore. He called another contact, an old friend from his time with the club who had some pull in the area. He needed to know if anyone had seen anything unusual, if anyone had heard whispers about a missing girl, or a group of people who had disappeared without a trace. The phone rang, then clicked as the call was answered. "Morrison, what's up?" the voice on the other end asked, gruff but familiar. "I need information. A little girl was left for dead near the spillway, tied up and abandoned," Jake said, his voice steady, despite the rage simmering beneath. "I need to know if anyone in the area has any idea who did this, or if anyone's been asking questions about her." There was a pause on the other end. "A kid, huh? That's messed up," his friend replied. "I'll ask around. Don't go getting yourself in too deep, Jake. You know how the club feels about digging into things like this." Jake's grip tightened around the phone, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm doing this. So get me what I need." Another pause, then the sound of a low grunt. "Fine. I'll make a few calls. You'll know soon enough." Jake hung up, staring at the phone for a moment longer. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. There was no going back now. He wasn't just protecting Emma from a physical threat. He was protecting her from the unknown, from whatever dark world she had been thrust into. He looked over at her, sitting quietly at the table, her legs dangling from the chair, her fingers playing with the edge of the table. "I'm going to get answers, Emma," he said, his voice firm. She nodded but didn't say anything. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though they both understood that words couldn't fix everything, that some things just needed to be done. After a few minutes, Jake grabbed his jacket, the cold leather feeling familiar as he pulled it on. "I'll be back soon," he said, reaching for the door. Emma looked up at him, her face still etched with worry. "Promise me you'll come back?" she asked. Jake hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. He had no idea what he was walking into, what kind of danger lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. "I'll be back," he said, his voice steady. "I promise." He stepped out into the cold morning air, the storm still lingering in the sky as the biker made his way toward the road. He didn't know how long this would take, or what kind of enemies he would make along the way, but he wasn't going to let anyone get away with hurting a child. Not while he was still breathing. He had made a promise to her, and for the first time in a long time, Jake Morrison was going to keep it. Jake returned to the garage later that evening, his mind still churning with the conversation he had earlier with his old friend. He had made the right calls, but there were no real answers yet. The silence of the garage was only interrupted by the occasional rustle of the wind outside. The storm had passed, but the weight of what was to come still hung heavy in the air. Emma was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked up under her, staring at the door as if waiting for Jake to come back. The sight of her, so small and vulnerable, gnawed at Jake. She had been through more than any child should ever have to endure. He had promised her safety, and he intended to keep that promise. As he closed the door behind him, she looked up at him with those wide eyes, searching for reassurance. "Did you find out anything?" she asked, her voice small. He shook his head, pushing back the frustration that wanted to spill out. "Not yet, but I will." She didn't press him further, but Jake could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. The kind of fear that didn't just come from the night before, but from the knowledge that whoever had hurt her might still be out there, watching, waiting. Jake sat down beside her, trying his best to mask his own frustration. "You're safe here, Emma. I won't let anyone hurt you again," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts. In his mind, she nodded, her small hand reaching out to grasp his. Jake's heart tightened at the simple gesture. He had never been someone who needed protection, but he understood now that he wasn't just protecting her. She had a place in his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone take her from him. They sat there for a while in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the garage lights above. It felt like an eternity, but in that quiet, Jake's thoughts began to clear. He was going to find the people who had done this to her. He would tear through every lead, every whisper, until he had answers. But more than that, he was going to find a way to make sure Emma could have a life free from fear, free from whatever had been haunting her before. He had always thought of himself as a protector, as a man who lived by a code of toughness, of loyalty, and strength. But now, as he sat beside Emma, he realized that protection wasn't just about strength. It was about vulnerability, too. It was about showing up for someone, being there when they needed you the most. That was the kind of protector he was going to be. He wasn't going to fail her. As the night stretched on, Jake's phone buzzed. He quickly pulled it out of his pocket, his heart racing as he saw the name on the screen. It was his friend. He answered immediately. "Jake, I got something for you." The voice on the other end said. "It's not much, but it's enough to get you started." Jake's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I've been asking around. There's a small group that's been making waves in the area. Low-key, but they've been linked to some shady stuff. They've been spotted around where your girl was left." Jake's mind started to work. "Do you have names?" "Not yet, but I'm digging. I'll keep you posted. Just be careful, all right? This is bigger than just some random attack. There's something more going on here." Jake's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll handle it. Just get me those names." The line went dead, and Jake stared at the screen for a moment. His thoughts were racing, but the only thing that mattered was Emma. He had to protect her. He stood up from the couch, his determination solidifying. "I need to go out for a bit. I'll be back soon," he told her. Emma looked up at him, her expression guarded but hopeful. "Will you be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake knelt down in front of her, taking her hand gently in his. "I'll be fine. You stay here. Keep safe, all right?" She nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'll be waiting," she said, squeezing his hand back. Jake hesitated for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on her before he stood up and walked toward the door. He knew what he had to do. The storm outside had passed, but a new kind of storm was coming, and he was ready to face it head-on. He walked into the night, the sound of his boots crunching on the wet ground the only thing he could hear. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to stop until he had answers. Until Emma was safe. He had made a promise, and he was going to keep it. Jake drove through the dark streets, his thoughts racing. The information his old contact had given him wasn't much, but it was enough to get him started. A small group with a shady reputation, involved in things that weren't just petty crime, but something much deeper. Something that involved Emma. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her situation than anyone realized. As he pulled into a dimly lit alley, the roar of his motorcycle drowned out by the engine, he looked around. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but the pit in his stomach told him something was off. He parked the bike, quickly dismounting and walking toward a nearby warehouse. The place was abandoned, worn down, and had an aura of secrecy about it. It wasn't the kind of place anyone should be near, but he wasn't anyone. He had a job to do. As he approached the back entrance, Jake's instincts screamed at him to be careful. The cold air bit at his skin, but it was the tension in his gut that made his senses sharper. He knew this wasn't just about protecting Emma anymore. It was about finding out who was behind all of this, who was pulling the strings, and why. The door creaked open with a slow, deliberate sound as Jake slipped inside, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The dim light from a single bulb hung above, casting long shadows across the room. Everything was covered in dust, untouched for years. But Jake could sense there was more to this place than its abandoned exterior suggested. He moved silently, his eyes scanning every corner, every crate, every shelf. Then he heard it, a soft rustling sound. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. The sound came again, closer this time. Someone was here. He moved cautiously toward the noise, his breath steady despite the adrenaline rushing through him. He rounded a corner, and there, standing by an old desk, was a man. A tall figure with a face covered by the hood of his jacket. The man's hands were buried in a stack of papers, and he hadn't noticed Jake's approach. "Who are you?" Jake's voice was low, but it carried the weight of authority. The man jerked his head up, eyes wide with surprise. "What the hell are you doing here?" the man stammered, stepping back as if preparing to run. Jake didn't move, his gaze steady. "I'm here for answers. You know something about a little girl, Emma. I want to know who's behind what happened to her." The man's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and confusion. He swallowed hard before speaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jake took a step forward, his voice cold. "Don't lie to me. You're involved, and I know it. Who's pulling the strings?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. For a moment, Jake thought he would try to run, but instead, the man spoke. "You don't know what you're getting into, man. It's bigger than you think. I don't know all the details, but I can tell you this. The girl's not the only one. There are others." Jake's pulse quickened. Others? He asked, his voice sharp. The man nodded slowly. Yeah, but you don't want to know who's behind it. It's not just some random group. Jake's mind raced. Who are they? The man opened his mouth to speak, but before any more words could come out, the door to the warehouse slammed open. Two men rushed in, their eyes fixed on Jake. The tension in the air became thick as they moved toward him, weapons drawn. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had faced worse. Get him, one of the men growled. Jake didn't wait for them to make the first move. He lunged forward, using his body weight to knock the nearest man to the ground. The other man swung a fist, but Jake blocked it and threw him into the nearby wall with a force that left the air knocked out of him. It wasn't a fair fight, but Jake didn't need it to be. He had a mission, and nothing was going to stop him. The first man scrambled to his feet, but Jake was faster. He moved in and disarmed the man, pinning him to the floor with his knee. The second man, still dazed from the wall, staggered to his feet, but didn't make another move. Jake glared down at the man he had pinned. Who sent you? Who's behind all of this? The man grimaced, clearly unwilling to answer. I won't ask again, Jake said, his voice low and threatening. Who's behind the girl? The man finally cracked. It's bigger than you think, he muttered. They're everywhere, and they won't stop until they've taken everything. Jake tightened his grip. Who are they? The man shook his head. I don't know, but they have eyes everywhere. You won't get far. Jake wasn't listening anymore. He shoved the man off and stood up, his fists clenched in anger. He wasn't getting all the answers he needed, but he had a name, a lead. That was all he needed. As the man scurried out of the warehouse, Jake stood in the middle of the room, his mind turning. This was just the beginning. He wasn't going to stop until he had everything, until Emma was safe, until he knew who was behind it all. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jake had a fire inside him that couldn't be extinguished. He was going to find them. He was going to find out everything. And he wasn't going to let anyone hurt Emma again. Jake drove back to the garage with his mind spinning, trying to piece together the information he had just gathered. The man in the warehouse had given him a lead, but it was far from enough. He knew he had to dig deeper, but with every step, the trail seemed to get colder, more elusive. He had thought he was getting closer to the truth, but now he realized how much more complicated this was going to be. As he pulled up in front of the garage, he looked at the familiar structure, the place that had become his sanctuary. But it no longer felt like the safe haven it once had. Now it was a place where he was on the clock, a ticking time bomb, with every second that passed bringing more danger. He parked the bike, quickly dismounted, and walked inside. Emma was sitting on the couch, looking out the window, her eyes distant. She hadn't said much since he left earlier, and that worried him. She was a smart kid, but the events of the past days had clearly taken their toll on her. As Jake walked in, she looked up, her face a mask of uncertainty. Are you okay? She asked quietly. He gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, I'm fine. He didn't want to burden her with the weight of his thoughts, but he could feel the tension in the air. She was still scared, still unsure about what would happen next. Jake sat down beside her, his muscles aching from the fight at the warehouse, but his mind still sharp, alert. Listen, Emma, he began, his voice steady. Things are going to get a little rough for a while, but I need you to trust me, all right? I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're safe. She nodded, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. But all she found was the same resolve he had felt since the moment he found her near the spillway. Jake was going to see this through, no matter what. He wasn't going to let her down. I trust you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart clenched at her words. It wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore. It was about protecting her from the darkness that had already touched her life. He couldn't allow that darkness to swallow her whole. I'm going to get us some answers, Emma, Jake promised. We're not going to stop until we know who's behind all of this. She gave him a small smile, the first he'd seen in days. But it didn't last. As Jake stood up to go back to the task at hand, his phone buzzed. He quickly pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly as he checked the screen. It was a message from his contact. He read it quickly, his expression hardening as he absorbed the information. They had found something. A location. A place where the group he had been investigating had been operating out of. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. And it was enough for Jake to know that it was time to move. I have to go, Jake said, turning to face Emma. She looked up at him, her face a mixture of concern and understanding. I'll be back soon. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. And don't open it for anyone. She nodded, though Jake could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Be careful, she whispered, her voice tinged with fear. He smiled softly at her, his heart heavy with the burden he was about to carry. I will. With that, he turned and walked out of the garage, determined to follow the trail wherever it led. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Emma was counting on him. As he started the bike and sped down the road, the wind whipping through his hair, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the danger ahead. He was getting closer, but so was whoever was behind the mess that had ensnared Emma. His grip tightened on the handlebars as he thought about her. How much she had been through already. He couldn't allow this to go any further. He wasn't just fighting for answers. He was fighting for her future, for her safety. And that meant going to places he had never thought he would have to go, doing things he hadn't wanted to do. He was getting deeper into a world of shadows and secrets. But Jake wasn't afraid. He had made a promise. He was going to see it through. He had to. As the night grew darker, Jake knew that time was running out. But he wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. The road ahead was unclear, but the only thing that mattered was making sure Emma was safe. And he was going to do whatever it took to protect her. Jake arrived at the location just as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon. The night had been long, filled with thoughts of Emma and what he had uncovered. He had followed the lead to a small, isolated building on the outskirts of town, tucked away in a corner of a forgotten industrial area. The building looked abandoned, the windows covered in grime, and the paint peeling off the metal walls. It had an air of desolation to it, like it hadn't been touched in years. But Jake knew better. He could feel it in his gut. This place was important. He parked the bike a few hundred yards away, hidden in the shadows, and approached the building on foot. The gravel under his boots crunched loudly, the sound almost deafening in the silence of the morning. As he neared the entrance, he paused, scanning the area for any signs of movement. There was no telling who or what he might encounter here, but he was ready. He had come too far to turn back now. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pulled open the rusty metal door. It creaked as it swung inward, the sound sending a shiver down his spine. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old machinery. The place was a maze of steel beams and old equipment, most of it covered in layers of grime. But it wasn't the surroundings that caught Jake's attention. It was the faint noise coming from deeper inside. Someone was here. He could hear soft voices, muffled by the walls. He moved carefully, his senses heightened, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. As he made his way through the dimly lit corridors, he could feel the tension building. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and his instincts told him to keep moving forward, to keep pushing. Then he saw them. A small group of men were gathered in a makeshift office, sitting around a table cluttered with papers and files. Their conversation stopped as soon as Jake entered the room, their eyes immediately locking onto him. The leader of the group, a tall man with a weathered face and dark eyes, stood up slowly, his hand moving to the gun holstered at his side. You shouldn't be here, the man said in a low, menacing voice. Jake didn't flinch. I'm looking for answers, he replied, his voice calm but firm. The man smirked. Answers? You've been asking the wrong questions, my friend. Jake's eyes narrowed. I'm asking the right questions now. I want to know who's behind the girl. The man's expression darkened, and he took a step forward, his posture aggressive. You're out of your league, pal. You don't know what you're dealing with. Jake took a step closer, his hand resting on the knife at his side. Then make me understand. The leader sneered but didn't respond right away. Instead, he signaled to the others, who began to rise from their seats. Jake's hand instinctively went to the knife, but he didn't pull it out yet. He knew that this wasn't just about force. He had to be smart, calculated. I'm not leaving until I get the answers I came for, Jake said, his voice cold and unwavering. The leader's eyes flickered with hesitation, and for a moment, Jake thought he might back down. But then, the man raised his hand, signaling the others to stand down. You want answers? The leader said, his voice now quieter, almost tired. You're looking at the wrong people. We don't know everything, but we know enough to stay out of it. There's a bigger game going on here, something you can't even begin to comprehend. Jake didn't say anything. He wasn't here for cryptic answers. He needed names, details, something concrete. Who is it? Who's running this? He demanded. The man shook his head. It's not just one person, Jake. It's bigger than any of us. There's a network. People and places you wouldn't even think to look. You're not going to find the answers by asking us. You're just a small part of a much bigger problem. Jake's jaw clenched. He had expected resistance, but this was different. Where do I start then? He asked, his voice laced with frustration. The man sighed, rubbing his temples as if the conversation was taking a toll on him. You want to help the girl? Then stop asking about the ones who left her. Ask about the ones who are watching her now. Jake felt a cold chill run through him. The ones who were watching her now. It was clear to him now that Emma was just a pawn in a much larger game. This wasn't just about saving her, it was about stopping a whole network. The leader of the group finally leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's a place. A safe house. If you want to find out what's really going on, that's where you need to go. But be warned, they won't make it easy. If you go there, there's no turning back. You'll be in deeper than you ever thought possible. Jake stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the information sink in. He didn't care how deep it was. Emma needed him, and he wasn't about to stop now. Where is it? He asked, his tone final. The man nodded slowly, giving him an address. Just remember, Jake, he said, you're not the only one looking for answers. With that, the man turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. Jake didn't waste another second. He had the information he needed. Now, all that was left was to get to that safe house and finish what he had started. He walked out of the building, his mind focused on the task ahead. He wasn't going to stop until he had the truth, and until Emma was safe. Jake's knuckles tightened around the handlebars as he sped down the road. The address he had been given burned into his mind. The sky was slowly lightening, casting a pale glow over the landscape as he made his way to the safe house. He knew he was getting closer, but the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach told him that things were about to get much worse before they got any better. The building was on the outskirts of town, tucked behind a dense thicket of trees, far from the prying eyes of the general public. As Jake approached, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He slowed the bike as he reached the perimeter of the property. The place was silent, almost too silent, like it had been abandoned. But Jake wasn't fooled. He could feel the eyes of whoever was watching him, the quiet tension in the air telling him he was being observed. He parked the bike out of sight, taking a moment to scan the surroundings. The safe house was a nondescript, run-down building that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The windows were boarded up, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. It looked like a place that had been forgotten, a place where secrets were kept, and Jake was about to uncover every last one of them. He moved quickly and quietly, staying low as he made his way to the back of the building. The smell of decay hung in the air as he approached the rear door, the faintest sound of rustling coming from within. He paused, listening for any signs of movement. Nothing. It was eerily quiet. His fingers brushed the old, rusted doorknob, and with a deep breath, he twisted it. The door creaked open, the sound echoing through the emptiness of the building. Jake stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. He could barely make out the outlines of broken furniture, piles of discarded boxes, and crates. This place had been used for something, but it had been a long time since anyone had been here. He took a few cautious steps, his senses on high alert. As he moved further into the building, the hairs on his neck stood up again. This time, he wasn't alone. He could feel it. A pair of footsteps echoed from somewhere ahead of him, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Someone was waiting for him. Jake's hand instinctively reached for his gun, but he stopped himself. No, this wasn't about shooting his way out. He had to get the answers. He had to find Emma's captors, and he had to do it without drawing unnecessary attention. The footsteps grew louder as they came closer. Then, a voice broke the silence. You've been looking for answers, a low, gravelly voice said, making Jake freeze. He knew that voice. He had heard it once before, in the warehouse. The leader. Jake's grip on his gun tightened, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. I didn't expect you to come all the way out here. The leader continued, his voice cold and mocking. You should have stayed away. This is bigger than you. Jake stepped into the dim light, locking eyes with the man. The leader was standing in the center of the room, his arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. Jake didn't respond. He wasn't here for words. You know, the leader said, his tone shifting, this could have been easy. You could have just let things go. But now you're in the middle of something you can't control. Jake's voice was low and dangerous. I'm here for the girl. I want to know who's behind this, and I'm not leaving until I have an answer. The leader's eyes narrowed. It's not that simple, he replied, stepping forward. The people behind this, they've been watching you, watching her, and they don't want you anywhere near the truth. Jake's pulse quickened. Who are they? The leader chuckled darkly. You think it's that easy? You think you can just waltz in here and demand answers? There's a reason you're still alive, Morrison. But that won't last. Jake took a step closer, his jaw clenched. You don't scare me. You should be scared, the leader said, his voice colder now. Because you're already in over your head. The people you're dealing with, they don't play by the rules. And when they come for you, they won't stop until you're gone. Jake's gaze never wavered. I've been in worse situations. The leader let out a bitter laugh. You don't know what you're up against. With a swift motion, he pulled something from his pocket. A small, silver device. Jake tensed, instinctively reaching for his gun. But the leader didn't raise a weapon. Instead, he pressed a button on the device, and the door behind Jake slammed shut. The sound echoed, and Jake turned quickly, realizing he was trapped. A soft clicking noise followed, and suddenly, the lights flickered on, revealing a dozen armed men in the shadows. You've made a mistake coming here, Jake, the leader said, his voice dripping with menace. But it's too late now. Jake's heart raced, but he didn't let fear take hold. He had come this far, and he wasn't backing down now. Not when Emma was still out there, not when he was so close to finding the answers. He stood tall, his eyes scanning the room, ready for whatever came next. The leader's words hung in the air, but Jake wasn't listening anymore. He had made his choice. Now, there was no turning back. Jake didn't flinch when the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in the dimly lit room with the dozen armed men. His hand hovered over his knife, but he knew better than to make a rash move. The leader stood in front of him, a cruel smile stretching across his face as the tension in the air thickened. You really thought you could just walk in here and take what you wanted? The leader sneered. Jake's eyes scanned the room, taking in the men who were slowly circling him. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. He had been in worse situations, and this wasn't the first time he'd found himself surrounded. But this time was different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about Emma. He wasn't leaving without her. You think you're in control here, don't you? Jake said, his voice calm but tinged with venom. Let me tell you something. I'm not here for a fight. I'm here for answers. And I'm not leaving until I get them. The leader's smile faltered, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. You don't get it, do you? You think you're the hero in this little story. But you're just a pawn. You always have been. Jake's eyes narrowed. A pawn? Yes, the leader said, stepping closer. You're nothing more than a distraction. You've been chasing shadows. The people you're looking for, the ones behind all of this, they don't care about you. They don't care about Emma. You're just a tool. A tool they'll get rid of when they're done with you. Jake's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to let this man get under his skin. He had to focus. He had to finish this. I'm done listening to you, Jake said, his voice low and steady. You're right about one thing. I'm not walking out of here empty-handed. I'm going to take down everyone involved in this. He stepped forward, the tension crackling in the room as he sized up the armed men surrounding him. The leader smirked, clearly amused. You really think you can take us all on? You're alone, Jake. You've always been alone. Jake didn't respond. He had heard those words before, from people who underestimated him. He had always been alone, but that had never stopped him before. And it wasn't going to stop him now. In a split second, he moved. His hand shot out, grabbing a nearby metal pipe and swinging it toward the closest man. The man barely had time to react before the pipe collided with his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. The others rushed at Jake, but he was faster. He dodged the first punch, pivoting to land a quick jab to another man's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. Every move was calculated, every action a step toward his goal. He wasn't going to stop until he had what he came for. The leader stepped back, his eyes flicking from Jake to the fallen men, clearly starting to realize that this wasn't going to go as smoothly as he had planned. Jake's eyes locked onto him. This is your last chance, Jake said, his voice cold. Tell me who's behind all of this. Tell me where Emma is, and I'll make sure you walk out of here alive. The leader's expression hardened. You think I'm scared of you? You've made a big mistake coming here, Jake. There's no way out of this for you. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Jake's jaw clenched, and in a blur of motion, he lunged forward, knocking the leader to the ground. The man struggled beneath him, but Jake's grip was ironclad. He leaned down, his face inches from the leader's. You don't get it, Jake whispered. I don't need to walk out of here. I just need the truth. And I'm going to get it, one way or another. The leader's eyes flickered with fear for a brief moment before he masked it with a grin. You won't get the truth. You'll never know what's really going on. You're just a small part of a much bigger game. Jake's patience was wearing thin. Enough games. Who's pulling the strings? The leader hesitated, but Jake could see the internal battle in his eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. The ones you're looking for? They're above us all. It's bigger than you think. It's a network. They'll find you before you ever get close to the truth. Jake's grip tightened, but before he could press for more, the door to the room slammed open, and a new figure stepped in. The sound of footsteps echoed in the cold room, and Jake turned, his heart sinking as he recognized the silhouette in the doorway. Another man. But this one was different. He was larger, dressed in black tactical gear, his face obscured by a mask. He walked with authority, his eyes scanning the room as he took in the scene. You're in over your head, Jake, the masked man said, his voice deep and unsettling. But I think you know that already. Jake didn't back down. I'm getting what I came for. And I'm not leaving until I have it. The masked man stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Jake. You should have stayed away, he said ominously. Now, you've crossed a line. And there's no going back. Jake's eyes were hard, his resolve unwavering. I don't care how many lines I've crossed. I'm getting answers. And I'm going to stop you. The room fell into silence as the two men faced off, the tension palpable. Jake had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jake stood face to face with the masked man, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected resistance, but not like this. The masked man's presence was overwhelming, an aura of power and control that radiated off him in waves. He wasn't just a soldier or a thug. No, this man was something more. He was the enforcer, the one who pulled the strings behind the scenes, and Jake could feel it in his gut. This was the man who held the answers. You don't belong here, Jake, the masked man said, his voice deep and menacing, sending a chill through the air. You've been digging where you shouldn't, asking questions that you don't want the answers to. Jake's grip tightened on the metal pipe he had grabbed earlier. The tension was thick, but he wasn't backing down. I'm not leaving until I find out what's going on. Until I know who's behind the girl. The masked man let out a low chuckle, the sound almost mocking. The girl? You think this is about her? You think she's the key to all of this? You're in way over your head. Jake's eyes narrowed. I'm not here to play games, he said coldly. Tell me what I need to know, or I'll make you talk. The masked man's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Jake saw a flicker of something. Fear? No, it was something else. A sense of urgency, of knowing that this was all about to collapse. The man stepped forward slowly, his movements calculated. You think you can just force your way through this? The people behind all of this, they're not like you. You can't just muscle your way to the truth. You don't have the power to stop them. I don't need to stop them, Jake replied, his voice firm. I just need to make sure that Emma is safe. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. The masked man stopped in his tracks, a strange look crossing his face. For a moment, there was silence. The room was so still that Jake could hear the faint sound of his own breathing. Then, the man spoke again, his voice quieter. You really don't understand, do you? It's not just about you and the girl. This is bigger than anything you've ever faced. You can't protect her. No one can. I'm not leaving without her, Jake said, stepping forward, his voice unwavering. And I'm going to bring down anyone who's involved in this, no matter what it takes. The masked man seemed to hesitate, but then his face hardened. You're making a big mistake. Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the building. Several more armed men entered the room, their eyes focused on Jake. The masked man turned to them, his hand raising in a signal for them to stay back. He looked at Jake one more time, a glint of something dark in his eyes. You think you're the hero of this story, but you're not. You're just a pawn, like everyone else. You've been marked, and now they're coming for you. Jake didn't flinch. He had heard threats like this before. But something about the masked man's words rang true. This wasn't just about rescuing Emma anymore. It was about taking down a system, a network that ran deep, that had its hands in places Jake couldn't even begin to understand. "I don't care what you say," Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not going to get away with this." The masked man studied Jake for a moment, as if weighing his next words. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he spoke. "You're right. You've come this far, and now there's no turning back. But you should know, Jake, that once you've crossed this line, there's no going back. You've just sealed your fate. And when they come for you, and they will, you'll wish you never asked these questions." Jake's heart beat faster. The man's words echoed in his mind, but he wasn't scared. He couldn't afford to be scared now. He had made a promise to Emma, and he wasn't going to break it. "I'll face whatever comes next," Jake said, his tone fierce. "But I'm not going to let anyone hurt her. Not while I'm still breathing." The masked man took a step back, his posture shifting as he called for his men to circle Jake. But Jake wasn't going to wait for them to make a move. He wasn't going to let them control the situation. "Enough games," Jake said, his voice a low growl. "Tell me where she is. Now." The leader's eyes glinted in the dim light. "You really want to know, don't you? You want to know who's behind all of this?" Jake nodded. "Yes, I need to know." The leader smirked, his lips curling into something that resembled a grin. "Then you'll regret it. But if you really want to know, it's not here. It's not with us. The real power lies with someone far above all of us. Someone who's been pulling the strings from the shadows." Jake clenched his fists, feeling the anger surge through him. "Who?" The leader took a step closer, his face inches from Jake's. "You'll find out soon enough. But you're not ready for what's coming. No one is." With that, the leader turned, signaling his men to move in. Jake didn't hesitate. He fought his way out, knocking the closest man down with a swift blow. The room exploded into chaos as Jake fought his way through, but his mind was clear. He wasn't leaving without answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. The door to the building crashed open, and Jake sprinted into the night, determined to follow the trail wherever it led. The stakes had just gotten higher, but Jake wasn't about to back down now. The answers were out there, and he was going to find them. Jake's breath came in sharp bursts as he ran through the dark streets, the sound of his boots pounding against the pavement echoing in his ears. He had no time to waste. The answers were out there, and he was closer than ever to finding them. His hands were still trembling from the fight, his muscles sore from the chaos in the warehouse, but his mind was clear. He couldn't let anything stop him. He had come too far. His thoughts kept drifting back to Emma. He had to find her. He had made promises to her, and he wasn't about to break them. The weight of everything was pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to slow down. He couldn't afford to think about what could go wrong. He just had to keep moving. He had to get to the safe house and take the next step, whatever that was. As he rounded a corner, Jake spotted a familiar car parked at the edge of an alley. He stopped dead in his tracks, narrowing his eyes. The car belonged to one of his contacts, someone who might have more information, someone who could give him the edge he needed. He approached the car cautiously, his hand resting on the knife tucked into his jacket. As he neared the vehicle, the window rolled down slowly, revealing a familiar face. It was his old friend, the one who had helped him gather the intel on the group he had been tracking. "Jake," his friend said, his voice low and tense. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." Jake didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm looking for the safe house. I need to know where it is." His friend hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before looking back at Jake. "You're not going to like what you hear," he said. "But if you're asking for the safe house, you're in deeper than you realize." Jake's jaw clenched. "I don't care about that right now. I just need to find it. Emma's still out there." His friend sighed, his face etched with worry. "I know. I've been following the trail, and I know who's behind it. But the safe house, it's not a place you just walk into. You'll need more than just muscle to get in there. You'll need a plan." Jake shook his head. "I don't have time for plans. I need to act now." "Listen to me," his friend insisted, his voice urgent. "If you go in unprepared, you won't make it out. They've got eyes everywhere, and they'll be expecting you. You've already pissed off the wrong people." Jake didn't flinch. "I don't care. I'm not backing down." His friend stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled deeply. "All right, fine, but you're going to need this." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, sleek black device. "It's a tracker. If you're going in, At least let me know where you are. I'll keep watch from a distance. You can't do this alone. Jake glanced at the device and took it from his friend's outstretched hand. Thanks, he said, his voice softening for a moment. I'll make it out. His friend looked skeptical but didn't argue. Just be careful, Jake. You don't know what you're up against. Jake slid the device into his pocket and nodded. I'll take care of it. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the car, heading toward the location his friend had given him. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. Every step brought him closer to Emma, and nothing was going to stop him now. As he moved deeper into the night, Jake's thoughts were laser-focused. He wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. He was fighting for her future, fighting for the safety and security that had been taken from her. And he was going to stop whoever was behind this, no matter what it took. The streets grew darker, and the buildings loomed larger around him, casting long shadows. He kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning every corner for any sign of movement, any indication that he was being watched. The last thing he needed was a surprise attack. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As he approached the entrance to the safe house, his breath caught in his throat. The building stood in front of him, looking just as abandoned and foreboding as the one he had visited earlier. There were no lights on, no sounds, just the eerie silence of the night. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. He knew this was it. This was where everything would either come to a head or fall apart. He wasn't going to fail. He reached the door, his hand brushing the handle. It was cold to the touch, but his grip was firm. With one last breath, he pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness of the building. He knew what he had to do, and he was ready. Jake stepped into the darkness of the safe house, the door creaking shut behind him. His eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light filtering in from the cracks in the walls. The air was thick, stale with the scent of dust and old wood. Every step he took felt like a leap into unknown territory, but he didn't hesitate. He was done being careful, done playing by the rules. Emma's safety was the only thing that mattered now. He moved through the building, his senses on high alert. There was a faint sound, muffled voices echoing from a room deeper inside. Jake's grip tightened on the gun holstered at his side, but he kept it tucked in, not wanting to reveal his position yet. He crept forward, inching closer to the source of the voices, knowing that he couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As he rounded a corner, he saw them. A group of men gathered around a table, their attention focused on something Jake couldn't see. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized one of them. The leader, the man he had faced before. The same man who had warned him this was bigger than he realized. Jake took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. He had come too far to back down now. He wasn't going to stop until he had all the answers. He took another step, and the floorboard creaked beneath him. The men turned, their eyes snapping to him. The leader smiled darkly, standing up slowly from his seat. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, his voice low and dripping with disdain. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Jake didn't respond. He wasn't here for words. He was here for answers. Where is she? Jake demanded, his voice hard and filled with authority. The leader's smile faded slightly, but he didn't flinch. You think you can just waltz in here and take her back? You've been chasing shadows, Jake. There's nothing left for you here. She's not the key to this. You're in way over your head. Jake took a step forward, his eyes locked on the leader. I'm not leaving without her, he said, his voice unwavering. You're not the one who gets to decide that. The leader's expression shifted, something colder flickering in his eyes. You don't get it, he said, his voice suddenly darker. She's already gone. There's nothing you can do to save her now. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Gone. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he didn't show it. What are you talking about? He demanded. Where is she? The leader stepped closer, his smirk returning. You've been too focused on the wrong things. You think this is about her? It's bigger than you think. Bigger than both of you. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't lose her now. Not after everything. He wasn't going to let these men control her fate. I'm taking her back, Jake said, his voice low, filled with a promise. The leader's eyes narrowed, and he gave a subtle nod to the men behind him. Before Jake could react, two of them moved toward him, their hands reaching for their weapons. Jake acted fast, spinning around and knocking the first man to the ground with a swift strike. The second man lunged at him, but Jake was already moving, dodging to the side, and using the man's momentum to slam him into the wall. His heart raced as he continued to fight, each move more desperate than the last. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for Emma, for the future he promised her. The leader backed away, watching as Jake took down his men with precise movements. But Jake could see the hesitation in the leader's eyes. He was starting to realize that Jake wasn't going to back down. With a final push, Jake lunged at the leader, knocking him off balance and forcing him to the ground. The two men locked eyes, and Jake knew this was his chance. "Where is she?" Jake demanded again, his voice full of fury. The leader gasped for breath, his pride broken. "You'll never find her," he said, his voice strained. "She's already gone. And when they find you, you'll wish you hadn't asked." Jake shook his head, his anger flaring. "I'm not asking anymore," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Tell me what I need to know, or this will get worse for you." The leader's eyes flashed with a mix of fear and defiance, but he finally spoke. "She's in the city, hidden in plain sight. They're using her to get to you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Who are they?" he pressed. The leader just smiled, a bitter, knowing smile. "The ones you've been chasing all along." Jake's chest tightened. He knew this wasn't over, but he had just gotten the break he needed. With a quick motion, Jake stood and pushed the leader aside, grabbing his phone from his pocket. He made the call. "Get the location. Now." He listened for a moment, the words sinking in as the realization hit him. Emma was still alive, and now Jake knew where she was. The fight was far from over, but Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He had a target, a goal, and he wasn't going to stop until he brought her back safely. No more hesitation. No more games. The end was coming, and he was going to make sure it was on his terms. I have written a thrilling and intense story inspired by Hell Angel stories, where a lone biker embarks on a journey to save a little girl caught in a dangerous web. In this gripping tale, Jake, the biker, relentlessly pursues the truth, uncovering dark secrets and battling enemies lurking in the shadows. Along the way, he discovers the lengths people will go to protect their own interests, all while Emma, the young girl, becomes a pawn in a far greater game. The story twists and turns, with moments of intense action and emotional depth, perfectly capturing the essence of Hell Angel stories. As Jake confronts powerful adversaries and uncovers a conspiracy that goes deeper than he ever imagined, his determination never wavers. Hell Angel stories often focus on loyalty, survival, and the raw, gritty reality of life on the edge, and this tale delivers all of that. With the promise to protect Emma and unravel the mystery behind her abduction, Jake's journey is full of suspense and high stakes. Fans of Hell Angel stories will find themselves hooked from the very first page, eagerly following Jake as he takes on a battle that will define his future. This story exemplifies everything that makes Hell Angel stories so captivating. The struggle between good and evil, the dark underworld, and the unwavering will to survive against all odds.